Hi, everyone. Is that like really loud? Do I need to step back a bit? Okay. Okay. If you could start finding your way to a table, we're going to start the next session in about 2 minutes. Thank you.
It is hard to tell when you're up here.
Okay, everyone, it's 11 o'clock. We're going to get our next workshop started. So if you could please find your seat. And welcome. My name is Cheryl Heister, and I am with the Literacy Council of Lancaster, Lebanon's Literacy and Learning Success Centers. And I also serve as the chair of the PAACE Public Policy and Advocacy Committee. And our workshop today is really all about building your advocacy muscles. And we're going to be hearing from some true experts in advocacy today. And you'll also have a chance to ask them some questions. So we're just going to dive right into the presentation. So first, I just want to tell you all a teeny little story that 2 years ago, when we were looking at the date for the conference and the location, the whole idea was that we would be in Harrisburg to really engage in meaningful advocacy, that we would be connecting with our legislators, we'd be going over there, we'd have a Capitol Hill Day, and then a little thing called Election Day was happening that we didn't think about at the time. So we are doing advocacy pandemic style. And pandemic style means the brute force method of doing whatever you can do in the moment to figure out something that's going to make this work. And I think we have a good plan for you. Carrie and Joe and I worked really hard to come up with a way to make this a meaningful experience and to have an opportunity to do a little follow-up. So we're just going to give you a tiny little bit of a background with state funding. You know, you've heard us talk about the state of funding in adult and family literacy education, which has really been level funding since 2011. So the reality of level funding for that many years in a row is, you know, in effect, a practical funding cut, because while accountabilities have gone up in terms of what we have to do and how we have to do it, our expenses have also gone up too. Occupancy, salaries, everything related to our work has been impacted by cost increases, but the funding hasn't really done much more than stay where it's at. So what we're doing is we have a two-pronged strategy this year for our funding ask for the legislature. And the first one is that we are advocating for a $10 million increase to the line item. Now, if you've been reading any of the PACE emails, you know that Governor Wolf did propose in his budget a $500,000 increase, which we are grateful for. And we believe that that is absolutely a result of the hard work of the PACE Public Policy Committee and Joe Merzin in particular, who has done an incredible job leading us through this process. But that is a first step. Like, we really see that as the beginning of getting this line item increased. So we're still working on that for next year's budget. That's one of the key strategies. And the other one is a standalone competitive grant piece of legislation that Joe and Carrie and a few others worked on to bring an additional $15 million into Pennsylvania through competitive grants that would really supplement and support the current adult and family literacy education line item. So we're going to be telling you like how you can advocate for those two things, because we really have to keep up the chatter. It's great that we have this small group of folks who are working the legislature, but it's really not enough. Like, it's not enough voices, and we're going to talk about that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. We have Joe Merzin, who's a Principal Government Relations staff member of Buchanan Ingersoll Rooney, and he's based in Pittsburgh. He has an incredible amount of experience and knowledge in legislative advocacy, and he has certainly been inspiring, and I am so personally grateful to Joe for all that he's done to help us figure this out. And then Carrie Harris, who is another hero of mine. Carrie is the Chief Executive Officer of Literacy Pittsburgh, also an incredible wealth of knowledge and really a mentor to me in this space. I am very grateful for all of her help. So we're going to dive right into the questions, and then we'll give you a chance to ask questions as well. So Carrie and Joe, thank you. The first question is for Joe. Can you tell us where we are in the state budget negotiation process?
Sure, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Thank you, Cheryl. It's a real pleasure, first of all, to be here with all of you at the PACE Conference. I'm really glad we could all be together. I've worked with some of you already in the advocacy space over the last year, and look forward to meeting and working with many more of you. To Cheryl's question, we are at a very critical point right now in the budget process. The Commonwealth's budget ends June 30th and starts July 1st. And so we are just weeks away from a budget resolution. We are very pleased that we were recognized in Governor Wolf's proposed budget in February when he gave his budget address with a $500,000 increase. But as Cheryl said, we still have a lot of work to do. $500,000 is really just scratching the surface, knowing that you all have had to do so much more with less, and the value of those dollars have gone down. And so right now, we're here asking all of you to continue the work that you're doing. If you have been helping with the advocacy piece, and of course, if you haven't, we would encourage you to do so in the coming weeks. We'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like here today. But reaching out to your legislators and legislative staff people between now and the end of June is critical. We have, as Cheryl said, we have two budget-related priorities. One is a legislative piece, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and the other, of course, is increasing the budget line. Our goal is to increase that line by $10 million, and that still doesn't even get the adult and family literacy line up to what it was prior to the 2007-2008 fiscal year. But it is a heavy lift. What we know right now in Harrisburg is government is divided, which of course should come as no surprise. And we are trying to see if we can get Democrats, as they come to the table in budget negotiations, to advocate for that increase in spending. As you all may be aware, under the Wolf administration, Democrats have led an increased education spend. Adult and family literacy line is one of the few areas that has fallen short. And so, we've been asking legislators over the past year, but really the last 4 to 5 months, to consider bringing this to the table with basic ed increases, higher ed increases, community colleges, and career and tech ed. And so, as you all know, right now we have a little thing called an election, which is tomorrow. And so we're waiting to see the results of some of the primaries that will be happening, and then the legislature will reconvene the last week of May. And that's really when things start to heat up in budget negotiations. Just to give you a little bit of backdrop in the timeline for the budget, agencies under the administration typically put together their budget priorities at the end of the fall and end of the year, leading into the next calendar year. And then the governor's budget address in February kicks off that process. After that, it's followed by House and Senate Appropriations Committee hearings with various different committees across the state talking about what their priorities are. And so that process has concluded, and now next week, what you'll start to see happening is legislative leadership in the House and Senate will come together with the governor behind closed doors and start to have a talk about what the budget might look like. Those conversations go up until the 11th hour at the end of June. We do expect the budget to be on time, if not a few days early. From what we understand in talking with the House Appropriations Chairman Stan Saylor, is that the budget, which has to originate in the House, will be voted out of the House of Representatives the second week, possibly, of June, where it would then move over to the Senate and be amended and possibly go back to the House before going to the governor. And so we're really looking at a very short timeline of 3 weeks or less when the budget will be decided. Again, I'll just reiterate the critical nature of the timing that we have all of you here today. And while Cheryl did mention, and she's right, it isn't exactly what we had hoped with the legislature being in session while you're all here. It still is important to be stopping by offices today, handing out information about PACE and about PACE's priorities. You have to imagine at this time of year that just about every interest group has already been in at least once to see legislators. And you know, our advocacy group is small, so we need more hands.
Thank you, Joe. Just one other follow-up question to that one. Do you think we have a real chance at seeing an additional increase in the line item this year if we are all really active?
I do. That's a good question. Right now, we have, as you all know, American Rescue Plan dollars that have come to the Commonwealth. Over $2 billion of those dollars remain, as well as the Commonwealth has continued month after month to collect revenue above revenue projections. And so the Commonwealth is at least sitting on a $4 billion plus surplus at this point in time. And so this is a real opportunity if we can make noise to get some changes in Harrisburg with our funding. But there has to be pressure in order to get that done. Mm-hmm. Legislators have to hear from all of you. They have to understand the value of the work that you do and why it's so topical right now, not just because of the fact that we're coming out of the pandemic, but we have a workforce shortage too. This is something that the legislature has talked about extensively over the last 4+ months in a variety of different legislative hearings, is what can the Commonwealth do and what can they as a legislature do to address the workforce shortage? And certainly adult education is a part of that puzzle.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, the next question is for you, Carrie. How did PACE's Advocacy Committee determine its priorities for the year? And what activities have been happening this year so far?
Okay, so Cheryl's asking me a question she could answer because she's the chair. But so I'm just saying this wasn't me, this was us together. I think two things, and Cheryl highlighted them already. It is really the increase in the line item, but also the recovery fund. I would say the recovery fund really, we started cooking that up over a year ago, right? Because what did we see? The same thing you all saw. There was stimulus packages for everybody but us, right? There was stimulus money for pre-K, for early childhood, tons of stimulus money for K-12, higher ed got stimulus money, lots of people were getting stimulus money. But here we are, right, the safety net, the bridge between K-12 work, post-secondary, and we weren't getting any stimulus money. So we said, well, if you're not going to propose a package for us, we're going to propose it for you. And thought, like, I had a conversation as a committee about what would it look like, right? What does this field really need right now? What kind of flexible dollars do we need to meet this moment, right? Our people are in a critical place right now. Not only are they struggling, right, but I'll speak in our region, they have unprecedented opportunity, right? As there's a worker shortage, employers are reaching further back into the talent pipeline. This is a moment for the students that we serve. So what would it take so that we could help bring them forward, right, and make them real contenders for middle skills and middle class work? So we put the recovery fund proposal together and said, and this line item has got to move. In some of our research, we looked at PDE's line item since Wolf has been in office. The whole, altogether, PDE, they have more than one line item. The whole budget is up 26%. 26%. Do you know how much the PACE line item is up? Cheryl showed you the chart. Nothing. And in fact, when we did an analysis of what that was really worth, that line item has lost 12.5%, right? So even though it's flat, it's lost value because money is, the dollar, 8 years ago was worth a lot less than $1 today. So we're losing ground, and everything else in PDE is gaining ground. Does that make you angry? Yeah. It makes me angry, and it's got to be enough, right? And we don't do this on behalf of ourselves. We do it on behalf of the never-give-uppers, the strivers that we serve, right? Those left behind, those who have just arrived. They deserve better than this. They've already been left behind of a K-12 system. They're trying to grab on to an American dream, and we owe it to them to be part of the solution. So that's how we determined, right, that everything else is growing, we're not growing, we've got to get 10 million. It's not even a rounding error in the PDE budget, much less the state budget, right? It's not a lot of money, but it would make a huge difference to us, right? So again, we had to look forward to stimulus because nobody else put it forward for us, and we needed to be able to help meet the moment, but we also need long-term sustainable funding for this field if we're going to be able to continue to help people become overcomers.
I hope you are a little bit angry to hear that, and I hope it motivates you to act today and in the future. And it's a darn good thing that educators believe that the pen is mightier than the sword. Otherwise, we'd be tapping into our pitchforks and torches in the next room when we descend upon the Capitol. But we don't have to because we have paper today. We did take pen to paper, so we'll be giving you some tools to take over with you later. This next question is for Joe. Who or what committee in Harrisburg has the most influence when negotiating the budget?
So this should come as no surprise, but I would say in that regard, the top committee in terms of budget negotiations would be the Senate and House Appropriations Committees. They're the ones who sat through the budget hearings I talked about earlier in the year with the agencies. They have massive staffs of people who dive into the budget, who know the issue areas, and can be really influential in shaping what a budget looks like. Typically, as budget negotiations happen behind closed doors, what will also happen is each caucus in the legislature, there are 4 of them, House and Senate each have 2, Republican and Democrat, and they caucus privately to talk about various different components of what's in a budget. And so those appropriations committee members are looked to in the caucus room when those conversations are happening to explain, what is PACE? What is the adult and family literacy line? Why is more funding needed? Similarly, 2 other committees of note are the education committees in the House and Senate, as well as labor and industry. We have spent an extensive amount of time over the last 5 months plus communicating with those committee members individually about both of our priorities, increasing the adult and family literacy line and our recovery fund legislation. We have received fairly positive comments from those members with whom we met, but of course we need to keep our foot on the gas as we move closer to budget. So those are the ones I would say are the most important in terms of legislative committees. Obviously, House and Senate Republican and Democrat leadership teams are important as well. They are the leaders of each of the 4 legislative caucuses are the folks who are at the small table at the end of the budget process. So as the budget gets closer to June, there are fewer and fewer people involved in negotiating a budget. So making sure that legislative leaders are hearing from individual rank and file members is critical as well. So again, we need everybody to reach out to their legislators to then ask those legislators to communicate with legislative leadership teams or committee chairs or other committee members about our priorities and why they're important.
Thank you, Joe. So, Carrie, this is for you. What is lobbying? Why is it necessary? And what are some examples of successful advocacy campaigns?
So lobbying is specifically trying to influence legislation, right? And in our case, that is what we're doing when we're talking. The budget is legislation, it's a piece of legislation, as is the recovery fund at this point. Those are both pieces of legislation. Advocacy is more broad, right? And that could apply to just really standing up for your cause, making sure legislators know who you are, know what you do, know the value that you're bringing to your community and the people you serve. They are both necessary, and one is insufficient without the other, right? You can't do lobbying without advocacy is insufficient, as is advocacy without lobbying. So I guess I would think about them broadly. I'm still fairly new to adult ed. Before this, I worked on some important statewide campaigns, which is part of the reason I'm fired up about this line item, right? I was part of the early childhood advocacy campaign, pre-K, which has grown into childcare. I played a small part in that campaign, and I was also involved in the Basic Ed Formula campaign, right? Stakeholders across the Commonwealth for the K-12 basic education formula. And I would say in both of those cases, those advocates had a broad strategy that it had numerous components. I'm just going to share them with you because I'm hoping that if you can help us think about how we might employ some of these strategies as a field, I think it could be really powerful. So there's always a legislative strategy, right? And this is what Joe does. His job is to help us find those champions and make sure that our ask is getting brought to the top of the list. And it's just like middle school, right? The more people that are talking about it makes it popular, right? And so that's Joe's job, is helping us get more people to talk about it. But the other parts of the campaign put pressure on that system to make them talk about it, right? And those parts of the campaign are a communication strategy, it's a research strategy, there's a grass-top strategy, and a grassroots strategy. Now, the grassroots strategy is what you might think of as the educate and elevate, right? So that is like having anybody and everybody infiltrate inboxes. It includes protest politics or anything like that where you've got mass mobilization. Very, very, very hard to pull off, right? The grass top strategy is where you might have influencers of those electeds talking about our issue, right? So for us, that might be employers, right? Community college presidents, donors, donors to you and donors to those elected officials, getting to them so that they can also get to the legislature and the members about these issues. The communication and research piece are closely tied. They are about having research to talk about so that you can help build your case for why this matters, and you can sort of rebut every complaint or objection you're going to get before they make it, about the return on investment, about how the other states are spending more money than we are, about the importance this plays to the community college system, for example, any number of things. That would be a research component. And then the communication strategy is really about mobilizing newspapers, blogs, whatever, across the state. how many of you have read at least 10 op-eds about how important early childhood is? Right? That was a very orchestrated campaign with ghostwriters that are, and basically finding Grass Tops leaders to agree to have their name attached to these op-eds, and then you get the op-ed printed, and then you recirculate it 1,000 times, and it is a way of like creating chatter. We saw it in the pre-K campaign, we certainly saw it in the school funding campaign, and you see it in transportation, you can see it in criminal justice. There's a playbook about how this happens. I think our hope was that we could stay in a legislative advocacy lane because this wasn't a ton of money, right? We're not asking for the kind of money that these other groups are asking for. I'm starting to wonder, we might have to broaden our strategy out a little bit, right? Especially with regard to Grass Tops, if we're going to be successful in the next budget cycle. Because truly, we've got to do two things, walk and chew gum, right now. We've got to try to push as much over the line by June 30 as we can, and we're already starting to think about what next year's budget cycle looks like, right? We have to be getting into the governor's office early, and it's not going to be the same governor. So that's the work that we're already engaged in.
If I could just add just briefly, when we decided to start working together with PACE, one of the first things we usually do is we spend about a year just doing advocacy alone, right? Making sure legislators understand who PACE is and who they serve and the value. Obviously, we didn't anticipate at the time that there would be billions of dollars on the table, so we were kind of just thrust into immediately doing direct lobbying to try to influence the legislation, whether that be the recovery fund or the budget process. And so we had a lot of ground to cover in a short period of time. Typically, I always encourage clients to spend time building the relationship with legislators before going in and making an ask. But again, we're kind of at a critical period here where we just have to launch into it if we expect to see anything more out of this budget process. So that's where we are right now in terms of lobbying versus advocacy. Really, it's doing both, frankly, at the same time. Regardless of whether or not, and we of course hope that you all help us with your local legislators in communicating with them about the priorities. We do hope that you take time on your own. Probably over the summer is really a great time when the legislature is not in session to go in and build a relationship, get to know them, get to know their staff people, and sit and talk about what's important. Try to bring those legislators in, if you're convening in-person classes, to come in and meet the students, to see what a class looks like, and engage with students. Frankly, allow them to come in and get a photo op. Let's be honest, a lot of elected officials want to be seen out in the community. So, I would say if you extend an invitation to your legislator or legislators, that they're likely to show up. So just keep that in mind as well.
Thanks, Joe. Joe, you can hang on to the microphone because I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about House Bill 1728 and Senate Bill 766 and how they may impact adult and family literacy education.
Sure. So I think Cheryl and Carrie talked about this a little bit earlier, but what we had decided to do was take advantage of the American Rescue Plan dollars, which are one-time dollars. The state has until 2024 to spend American Rescue Plan funds. And so we thought, why not take advantage of that opportunity for this one-time source of funding to make an impact in the industry and try to do some things or allow the dollars to be spent in a way that the current dollars in the adult and family literacy line are not permitted to be spent. As you know, those dollars are all restricted to certain things. This recovery fund opens up the possibilities to meet the moment right now, again, in addressing the workforce shortage, as well as getting folks the job skills, training, and education they need to advance themselves. And so we found two prime sponsors to carry our legislation. House Bill 1728 is by Representative Jim Struzzi in Indiana County in southwestern Pennsylvania. He had a power plant that was at risk of coming offline, and wanted to really seize the moment to prepare his constituents for the workforce while they were out of work. Similarly, in the Senate, we have Senator Bartolotta from Washington County, Pennsylvania, also in Southwest PA. She's the chair of the Senate Labor and Industry Committee. And so we sat down with them and their staffs and our PACE Advocacy Committee, and we said, where are the areas where folks could really use the money right now that they can't spend existing adult and family literacy money? And we looked at 4 different buckets: digital literacy, workforce partnerships, career services, and tuition assistance. And we've gotten a lot of buy-in right now from legislators to help advance that legislation forward. We have had a vote out of the House Education Committee. That vote was unanimous, and we are still, our legislation in the Senate is still in the Education Committee, and we're trying to get Senator Martin to move that bill at one of his next Education Committee meetings. He is a co-sponsor of the bill and is supportive, but we've been kind of going back and forth a little bit with his staff and committee staff, talking about the mechanics of moving that bill out of committee. I won't get really into the weeds totally on that, but we are pushing that forward. And I will tell you, Senator Bartolotta and Representative Struzzi have gone to their legislative leaders, and they asked for that legislation to be included in the context of the budget, which is very helpful. But 2 members going to their leaders isn't enough. So again, having folks reach out to their local legislators and asking them to reach out to their respective leadership teams, and we can help you do that if you are interested in helping, that would be beneficial at this time.
Thanks, Joe. And can you talk a little bit more about what all of the PACE members can do to help get an increase in that line item?
Yeah, so Carrie highlighted some of this, right? So grassroots, grass tops are really critical. I would encourage both. At the grassroots level, if you have students, if you have teachers who would like to write letters to legislators encouraging them to support our objectives, that would be great. On the grass top side, again, this is finding key influential people who are connected to legislators who could influence them to make a decision. So you may have some board members or major corporate contributors to your organizations or foundation leaders who have close ties already with elected officials. Having them personally pick up the phone if they have that ability and call that legislator would make a tremendous difference. They could also send letters as well. But those are just 2 of the ways that I would recommend. If you do have the time and you're willing, setting up a meeting with your local legislator or their staff and going in and talking about the priorities really makes a big difference. Having that personal one-on-one contact versus sending a letter or an email makes a huge difference. And I would encourage everyone, again, to do that even outside of the legislation, just going in from an advocacy perspective and building that relationship. They're all people too. They're easy to talk to, and they want to know what's going on in their community and what can be beneficial.
Carrie would like to
chime in on that. So I just want to be the voice that encourages you. I'm trying to imagine what it might feel like if you haven't done this before. You might think, well, I don't have time, which I know, right? Everybody, especially right now, many of us are still in competition for state grants. We're finishing those proposals. This work is very compliance heavy. There's a lot to do. There's always more to do than there is time. Maybe you're busy. So I get that. I would encourage you that if you are relying on public dollars on the line item to fund your program, you have to make time. You have to make time. If you're a publicly funded agency and they're not hearing from you, we're going to be in trouble, right? There's a saying in community organizing, that's how I was sort of trained up early, if you are not at the table, you're on the menu, okay? Please don't be on the menu. Don't let your students be on the menu, right? Find a few minutes. I added up all of my time last year, and you think, like, I must spend a lot of time doing this, right? It was less than 10% of my time. And you probably don't need to give that much. But if you do something, it will make a big difference. We don't want to be on the menu. Don't worry about being an expert, right? Like, truly, my experience is these electeds, like, they run for office because they like people, and they want to help, and they want to do good in their communities, regardless of what party they're in. They really do care, and they're always, a lot of them are super curious, especially the women, super curious about what you do. And they will be making connections about, oh, do you know about this program? You know, and so this is just an opportunity to get them invested in our success, right? In your success with your agency, with your students, and in our success as a field. You don't have to be an expert about the mechanics of lawmaking, how that sausage is made. You just go in with what you already know and the passion you already have to help your students and a willingness to make a new friend. Really, that's all we're asking you to do, is spend a few minutes. The nice thing about the pandemic is that these things take less than 15 minutes. You can schedule a call, it's a Zoom call, you can be on and off of there in less than 15 minutes. They don't have more than 15 minutes to give you. You probably don't have more than 15 minutes to give. But in 15 minutes, you make your case, and now you're a little more on the table, right? You do a few of those. If everybody in this room did a few of those between now, let's just say 2, between now and June 30, we'd be in a much better state.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carrie. Absolutely, Joe, yes.
To that end, too, you know, I think a lot of people think people in my position or my role are just fixers, right? That's not the case. You have to go in and you have to have these conversations. And we have done the advocacy committee what feels like 1,000,001 meetings. But if you don't bring a little bit of local flavor to the table when you're having a conversation with a legislator and making that connection to the district, they might not see the value if it's just Joe lobbyist coming in or Cheryl or Carrie, you know, being in a meeting with me and having those conversations. So the local connection is really what makes the difference. That's what they care about.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. I did want to give a shout out to someone who's sitting at the table here with some IU13 folks. It's Sylvia Place-Hildesheim. She's a teacher at IU13, and she served on our advocacy committee for a while until other responsibilities kind of pulled her away. But I really encourage you to go talk to Sylvia, because this, you know, I think there's how many administrators in Pennsylvania and how many teachers. And this is a teacher who invited a legislator into her classroom, which then grew into a combined agency Capitol Hill Day. And she created a document for you that has lesson plans. It has ideas for student letters. It's chock full of great information for you as a teacher. So advocacy is not just for your boss. Like, it's really important that teachers are doing this too. So please grab one of these. It's back at the PACE table. It's a great resource. Sylvia did an amazing job building that relationship with her representative in Lebanon County, and then, you know, getting the students connected, bringing it to, you know, 2 agencies, not just one. So she's a great resource. Maybe Sylvia, you could just stand up so people can see you and they know who to find. Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. Okay, I have a question now. This is really a question for both of you. So where should PACE members start when it comes to advocacy? How do we start?
Sure. So you have us as a resource, number one, first and foremost. The 3 of us and the rest of the advocacy committee can help you get connected with your local legislator or your legislative delegation. What I mean by that is each county typically has multiple legislators representing it, both in the House and Senate. It's important, if you can, to try to reach out to each of those. Whether that be, again, through email, face-to-face meetings, Zoom. We can help get you there. We can help you with talking points. And if you feel really uncomfortable, we can try to be there on the call with you if that's helpful. Now, obviously, there are a lot of you in this room, so we hope, you know, you feel comfortable enough having those conversations directly, and you should. These meetings really aren't hard for you to do, and again, it's a nice way for you to relationship build.
Yeah, I would just say, I think everything, just like learning, right? Just like adult learning, it's all relationship-based, right? Start building those relationships with your legislator, with their staff, right? Don't discount the staff. They're often playing triage for the member, right? Like, let me get you the 3 most important things that happened today. So don't discount the importance of their staff. And if you have a good relationship with staff that can become a great champion for you, that's a win for sure. That leads you to a good relationship with the member.
Sorry, I stole that without asking. You know, one of the other things I just thought of too that I should mention, and we talked about the grass tops a little bit earlier, having conversations with your board members, if you have a board, and finding out what relationships they might already have. Again, same thing with any teachers. Ask them. See, I mean, people have kids in activities together or do other community functions together and may have already a built-in relationship that you do not. So take advantage of the folks that you all have in a paid or volunteer capacity and just have a conversation with them and try to find out if they are in fact connected with any legislators or legislative staff people.
So, to that end, I think one thing we've started to do on the Literacy Pittsburgh board is identify people with political connections to join the board, right? There's a way to reverse engineer it, right? People that have influence to join your board. One of my colleagues said to me recently, maybe you all know this adage, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money, right? So getting people on your board is a way to ask for advice, and hopefully it helps you end up getting an advocate for some resources.
Thank you. Well, now we'd like to open up questions from all of you. So who has questions for our panel? Liz.
So that's a good question. She asked if there are restrictions to the federal dollars that the Commonwealth currently has in hand. The answer is yes. The Treasury, the U.S. Department of Treasury, issued a 346-page document that provides a lot of guidance around those dollars. They are restricted to certain activities. We tried to do as best we could, again, when we were putting the recovery fund together, to take that into consideration. And so, that's part of the conversation that we've been having right now that I talked about earlier with legislative leadership and committee staff, is making sure that if in fact this bill moves forward, whether that be as a standalone piece of legislation or if it gets included in the final omnibus budget bill, that those uses are in fact eligible. And so what you may end up seeing is, we talked about those 4 buckets. They may need to change a little bit. Based on the Treasury guidance and whether or not Appropriations Committee staff feels as though it meets the muster of what's in the Treasury guidance. So thank you for that question. So I would say either, honestly.
Or both.
Or
I would say both.
Yeah, both. Thank you. Obviously being a constituent and having a vote in a member's district is meaningful, but then, of course, having your organization physically located somewhere and serving constituents in a member's district is impactful as well. So yeah, I would say definitely reach out to both if you can, if you're willing. There is a resource on the state legislature's website, legis.state.pa.us, where you can look up your address, or if you have a physical location for an office, you can look that address up as well and identify who your legislators are. And again, we can help you with that.
Kat. Did you hear? Okay.
Yeah, we do have a script for folks who are willing to, have conversations by phone or in person. Obviously, you could use those talking points and you know, make them a little bit more personalized to your particular organization, talking about how many students you serve. It makes a difference. Talking about you know, what you're doing in the community makes a difference as well. You can use those same talking points to craft an email or a letter if you'd like to, but obviously, again, you know, we think the face-to-face / Zoom meetings and phone calls are more impactful than sending something out in writing. But I don't want to discourage any activity.
Yeah, we're really lucky. We're all, as a PACE member, you're automatically a member of COABE, the National Trade Association for Adult and Family Literacy Education. And they do a lot of the research part that Carrie was referring to earlier. So we did provide you, it's back on the PACE table for anybody who wants a copy. We have the COABE legislative talking points, and then we took this document and we distilled it into a single page for Pennsylvania. So you can find some information here to get you started. And then, like Joe said, we really strongly recommend that you personalize it, that you talk about your organization, your students, you know, what that makeup is, and looking at like their legislative districts too, and helping your students make those connections as well.
I do want to point one thing out to that end. I'm sure you've all read in the paper or saw on the news, but all of the legislative districts will be changing in the new year. So unfortunately for us, we will have to go back and we will have an election with new legislators. We will have to meet all of them. We will have to learn their new districts. And so, you know, if you look up a legislator or legislators this year, it will change possibly in the new year. So just keep that in mind as well.
Just when you think you have it figured out, right?
I think that's why the relationship building is so important, because they change so much, right? And so you have to make a personal connection every time it changes so they know who you are. And I feel strongly that you kind of got to start with that relationship and then pile on the student contact, right? Pile on all of that, bring them to a classroom, do those other things, but I think the personal relationship with somebody in the agency is where the work has to start.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have a copy of it here, and we were going to provide the link, so thank you for pointing that out.
I was going to mention, too, that the people in this room, the most impactful thing you could possibly do is bring your students with you. Let your students love to hear what's happening, your successes and your stories. As educators, we don't do it enough to bring our students with us and show how awesome we all are. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a great resource. Thank you. And that's data that we use to inform our other handouts. So thank you for saying hi. Any other questions? Going once. Oh, Timothy.
What materials are on the PACE website that would be helpful for advocacy?
I have not a clue, but we are going to be fixing that very, very soon. We have a whole list of things that need to go on the website. So in the next week, you will be able to find them, and we'll probably send out something in the PACE newsletter to let people know.
And I realize we covered a lot of information. We will, of course, be around today, so if you have questions and you don't feel comfortable asking now, of course, just pull us aside and ask us. Happy to help answer questions or explain things that I didn't go into detail on, or if I, you know, bored you or something like that, you know, you can tease me a little bit about that too.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay, so what are our next steps? So as we said a few times today, more than a few times, I think, we've been really hard at work as a small but mighty committee, but it's now time for your elected officials to hear from you. So between now and June 30th, we need you to help us elevate our collective voices. We need you to connect with your legislators. We need you to be reaching out to your senator and your representative and ask for two things. We need you to ask for them to support a $10 million increase to the adult and family literacy education line item. And we need you to ask them for a letter of support for the adult education and workforce recovery fund. And of course, we need you to vote tomorrow, right? Everybody's going to vote, right? So those are our asks. And today, we're going to go take a visit to the Capitol. So how many of you have signed up for a tour? So we have capacity for 80 people. We ended up eliminating the 4 o'clock tour because we only had 3 people signed up for it. So we're going to combine, we're going to have 2 tours. So there's capacity for 80. I think we still have a little bit of room, but you need to sign up like before lunch if you want to go, because we're actually kind of figuring out how to group you so that we can put you on a task while you're in the Capitol. So not only will you get a tour, you'll get to see the lovely Mercer tile and all the other, I mean, it's just a splendid building. If you haven't been in there, it's really worth the trip over. It is an absolutely beautiful building. I think it's probably the most beautiful Capitol building in the country. And then when you're there, we're going to ask you to take one of these. Now, these are on your table, but only take one if you're going on the tour, because we don't have enough for everybody to take a couple of these. And this will be one of the docs that you'll be able to download from the PACE website very soon. So this was just recently updated, and we're going to ask you to take this, every person going on the tour, and then take an index card and a paper clip, and we'll give you further instructions about what to do with the index card and the paper clip a little bit later, but just grab one of those now if you're going on the tour and hang on to it so you have one, because we're going to be visiting offices and we're going to be visiting empty offices and delivering papers to people. We're going to be asking you to follow up with them. Joe, anything to add to that?
The only thing I'll add to that is that we are trying to stagger the outreach that will be going on. Again, with Election Day being tomorrow, you will not see a lot of people in the Capitol building. You will not see legislators. Legislative staff may not be there, but leaving the material is still of value. So when the legislature returns to session next week, they have that PACE document about what our priorities are on their desk. And of course, we'd like to encourage you to follow up with your respective legislators as well. So we are asking folks, both tour groups, if you can, to come up to the Capitol between 2 and 2:15. With the volume of folks that we're looking at coming up to the Capitol, just be mindful there is security to go through, and that takes time. So that's why we're trying to get folks there a little early for the 2:30 group. And we will have, as Cheryl said, 2 groups. So if one group's on the tour, the other group will go around and hand out materials until it's time for their tour at 3:30.
Yep, and then the other, yeah, make sense? Okay. All right, I think that might be everything. Oh, and the tour does take between 30 and 45 minutes. So you're done a little bit early. You can go stretch, take a walk, talk to Sylvia. And I hope you have a wonderful time at the Capitol and enjoy the rest of the conference.